The Vatican, a city-state that has long represented the pinnacle of religious authority and spiritual influence in the Christian world, is steeped in layers of history that are both awe-inspiring and, at times, deeply unsettling. While the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica and the sacred rituals of the Catholic Church are widely known, there exist darker, obscure corners of its past, one of which is the secretive wedding ritual that history tried to bury. The origins of this enigmatic ceremony are rooted in a complex intertwining of political power, ancient tradition, and an enduring desire for absolute secrecy. To understand the origins of the ritual, one must first examine the environment in which it developed. The early Catholic Church, emerging from the shadow of the Roman Empire, inherited not only the religious fervor of its predecessors, but also many of their ceremonial practices. The Romans, after all, had a highly ritualized society in which marriage ceremonies, religious observances, and political alliances were interwoven. Many of these ceremonies were rich in symbolism, sometimes bordering on the theatrical or the grotesque, and were designed to reinforce social hierarchies and the power of the elite. It is within this context that the Vatican's secret wedding ritual finds its first roots. Historical accounts suggest that the ritual was initially designed for the union of highly influential couples, those whose marriages carried both spiritual and temporal significance. Unlike ordinary weddings, which were publicly celebrated, these ceremonies were restricted to an inner circle of clergy and nobility. They were shrouded in layers of secrecy, often performed behind locked doors in obscure chapels within the Vatican, with strict instructions forbidding any record or discussion of the proceedings. This exclusivity served two purposes. It reinforced the Church's control over high-profile unions, and it mystified the ritual, making it appear both sacred and fearsome. The symbolic elements of the ceremony also trace back to ancient religious traditions. Scholars note striking similarities between aspects of the ritual and the rites of pre-Christian Rome, particularly the sacred marriages of the Vestal Virgins and the ritualistic unions performed during the festival of Lupercalia. These ceremonies often included symbolic acts intended to ensure fertility, social harmony, and divine favor. Over time, the Church absorbed and modified these rituals, stripping them of pagan connotations while retaining the underlying aura of mystique. What remained was a ceremony that appeared outwardly Catholic, yet was imbued with secrecy and esoteric symbolism that only a select few could comprehend. By the Middle Ages, as the Vatican's political power grew alongside its spiritual influence, the ritual became more elaborate. It was no longer just a private formality for select couples. It became a tool for the Church to assert authority over matters of inheritance, legitimacy, and alliances. Royal families and powerful nobles often found themselves bound by the rules of this secret ceremony, effectively placing their most intimate personal decisions under Vatican supervision. The ritual's secretive nature allowed the Church to maintain control and, simultaneously, cultivate an aura of fear and reverence, an assertion that the ultimate authority over life, love, and legacy rested with the papacy. The secrecy surrounding the ritual was also practical. In an era rife with political intrigue, rebellion, and factional violence, the Church needed to protect these ceremonies from prying eyes. Leaks of sensitive unions could trigger conflicts between noble families or upset delicate balances of power in the European courts. For this reason, the ceremony's most sensitive details were deliberately obscured, passed down orally through trusted clerics, and sometimes even codified in manuscripts that were hidden in the Vatican's secret archives. It was this very secrecy that contributed to the ritual's modern reputation as disturbing and sinister. Details were deliberately veiled, and the absence of information allowed imagination and rumor to flourish. Accounts from historians suggest that the ritual incorporated specific ceremonial objects and gestures that were highly symbolic, though deliberately left ambiguous to outsiders. Some described the use of consecrated rings and garments with arcane markings, while others spoke of ritualized vows that went beyond the standard promises of love and fidelity. Certain elements even mirrored practices meant to symbolize sacrifice, penance, and the intertwining of spiritual and earthly obligations. These layered meanings reinforced the idea that the ceremony was not merely a wedding, but a profound spiritual covenant, overseen by divine authority and safeguarded from profane understanding. The participants themselves were often chosen with extreme care. Only those deemed spiritually, morally, and politically suitable were permitted to take part, and witnesses were few and tightly vetted. In some cases, clergy were sworn to oaths of silence under threat of excommunication or severe penance. The combination of exclusivity, ritual symbolism, and secrecy created an aura of mystique that would endure for centuries. To contemporaries, the ceremony may have appeared as a deeply sacred union. To outsiders, it seemed almost otherworldly or even sinister, precisely because so little could be known about it. Over the centuries, as Europe moved into the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, curiosity about the Vatican's hidden rituals grew, fueled by scholars, travelers, and clerics who either broke the rules of secrecy or pieced together fragmentary records. However, the Church remained adamant about maintaining control over its image and legacy. References to the secret wedding ritual were often redacted, manuscripts altered, or eyewitness accounts dismissed as hearsay. This deliberate suppression only amplified the intrigue, lending the ritual a near-mythical reputation that persists to this day. In conclusion, the origins of the Vatican's secret wedding ritual are a testament to the Church's complex interplay of power, religion, and secrecy, emerging from the ceremonial traditions of ancient Rome, adapted through the lens of medieval Catholicism, and tightly controlled for centuries. The ritual was designed to serve both spiritual and political purposes. Its secrecy, exclusivity, and symbolic complexity ensured that it remained a hidden fixture of Vatican life, one that history itself seemed eager to bury. Yet the fragments that survive, combined with speculation and rumor, continue to captivate the imagination, hinting at a hidden world where love, power, and devotion were entangled in ways both sacred and unsettling. While the origins of the Vatican's secret wedding ritual were rooted in tradition and political strategy, the ceremony itself carried elements so unusual and shocking that even many within the Church reportedly found them difficult to reconcile with Christian doctrine. The very secrecy of the ritual only heightened its mystique, fueling centuries of speculation, rumor, and horror. Accounts from surviving manuscripts, clandestine letters, and whispered testimonies reveal a ceremony that was far more than a typical matrimonial event. It was a complex, symbolic, and at times disturbing union, one designed to intertwine spiritual, social, and political authority in a single dramatic act. At the heart of the ritual were symbolic acts that, to the uninitiated, appeared extreme or even macabre. Whereas most weddings emphasized love, union, and public celebration, this ceremony included gestures and objects intended to symbolize obedience, sacrifice, and spiritual submission. Some historical references speak of the use of elaborate, highly ornate garments marked with cryptic religious symbols. These robes were more than mere decoration. They represented the merging of two individuals under divine scrutiny, their personal identities subsumed into a higher spiritual purpose. The garments were often heavy, cumbersome, and deliberately uncomfortable, a physical manifestation of the seriousness and weight of the vows being undertaken. Participants were required to wear them for hours, sometimes standing or kneeling in near-total silence, creating a physically and mentally demanding environment. One of the most shocking elements, according to certain clandestine accounts, involved ritualized oaths that extended beyond conventional wedding vows. Couples were said to swear allegiance not only to each other but to the Church, the Pope, and, symbolically, to the spiritual well-being of the entire Catholic world. These vows were sometimes taken while holding objects of deep symbolic significance, crosses, ceremonial swords, or rings engraved with mystical inscriptions, each intended to reinforce the participants' subservience to divine authority. Historians suggest that these acts were designed to remind the couple that marriage was not simply a personal or social contract, but a sacred covenant with cosmic implications. To those outside the ceremony, this conflation of personal intimacy with institutional power appeared unsettling, even coercive. Adding to the ritual's intensity were symbolic gestures that invoked themes of death, penance, and sacrifice. Some accounts describe the use of candles, incense, and even faint traces of blood, either metaphorical or literal, as part of the ceremony's climax. These elements were thought to cleanse the participants spiritually, purging them of worldly corruption and preparing them for a higher union. Witnesses reported moments where the couple had to kneel for extended periods before an altar, while the officiating clergy intoned prayers in archaic Latin, sometimes punctuated by harsh rhythmic strikes of ceremonial implements on stone floors. The effect was both hypnotic and intimidating, reinforcing the Church's dominance and the solemnity of the U. For outsiders, these practices seem terrifying, even ritualistic in a way reminiscent of ancient mystery cults, blending devotion with a sense of foreboding. Equally controversial were the secretive procedures surrounding consent and witnessing. Only the most trusted members of the clergy were allowed to officiate, and outside observers were strictly forbidden. In some versions of the ritual, the couple could not see each other until the very moment of certain symbolic acts, heightening tension and reinforcing the idea that the ceremony was directed by forces greater than themselves. Scholars have noted that this deliberate withholding of visual and verbal confirmation created a psychological effect, making participants feel both elevated and vulnerable. While intended to induce spiritual humility to onlookers and later commentators, it gave the ceremony a cult-like, unsettling quality. Another element that contributed to the ritual's disturbing reputation was the highly ritualized interaction with sacred objects. Manuscripts suggest that couples might be required to touch relics, sip consecrated liquids, or walk barefoot across specially consecrated surfaces. These acts were not merely symbolic, they represented the participants' willingness to submit entirely to the Church's authority. Some historians argue that the use of these objects, particularly when accompanied by strict ceremonial rules, created an aura of fear, reinforcing the idea that deviation or disrespect could carry severe spiritual consequences. To modern eyes, these gestures appear strange, if not coercive, further fueling the mythos of a disturbing Vatican wedding. Even the language of the ritual itself was intentionally archaic and esoteric. Prayers and vows were often spoken in forms of Latin long removed from common usage, meaning that participants frequently recited sacred texts without fully understanding them. This linguistic barrier was deliberate, a mechanism to ensure obedience and create a sense of otherworldly authority. The combination of incomprehensible words, strange symbols, and physically demanding gestures made the ceremony psychologically intense, leaving participants in a heightened state of awe and, according to some accounts, fear. This layer of mysticism was one of the ritual's defining characteristics, blurring the lines between devotion, manipulation, and theatrical performance. The secrecy surrounding certain extreme practices, described only in fragmentary historical documents, added to the ritual's chilling reputation. Some reports hint at shadowy rites performed during the ceremony that involved symbolic representations of judgment, penance, or even symbolic suffering. As part of the covenant between husband, wife, and church, while it is difficult to separate fact from legend, the very existence of these accounts underscores the ceremony's capacity to disturb. In a world where marriage was typically celebrated publicly and joyfully, the intensity, rigidity, and mysterious undertones of this ritual were both alien and threatening, even to contemporary observers. Finally, the shocking nature of the ritual was amplified by the Church's deliberate efforts to suppress knowledge of it. Any detailed accounts were often hidden, censored, or dismissed as heretical. The act of concealment itself added an air of danger and intrigue. People speculated that the ritual involved things too sacred or too scandalous for ordinary believers to know. Over time, These speculations became part of the collective memory, transforming the ritual from a secret ecclesiastical ceremony into a legendary event whispered about with fear and fascination. In summary, the Vatican wedding ritual was shocking not merely for its secrecy, but for its complex, psychologically intense, and symbolically extreme elements. From ritualized oaths and archaic ceremonies to symbolic gestures involving sacrifice, obedience, and mystical objects, every aspect of the ritual served to enforce the authority of the Church while elevating the participants into a highly controlled spiritual experience. While it may have been intended as a sacred covenant, the combination of secrecy, psychologue, rigor, and ritualized intensity rendered it disturbing in the eyes of outsiders and, in some cases, even insiders. Its legacy, preserved only in fragmentary accounts and censored manuscripts, has cemented the ritual as one of the most mysterious and unsettling ceremonies in the history of the Vatican. The Vatican, as the epicenter of Catholic authority, has long been acutely aware of the power of perception. For centuries, it meticulously curated its image as a bastion of spiritual guidance and moral authority. Within this context, the secret wedding ritual posed a unique challenge. It was a ceremony so obscure, complex, and, in the eyes of some contemporaries, unsettling, that even whispers of it threatened the Church's carefully managed reputation. As a result, attempts to conceal and suppress knowledge of the ritual became nearly as elaborate as the ritual itself, creating a shadowy history of secrecy, censorship, and carefully orchestrated obfuscation. The earliest forms of suppression began almost as soon as the ritual took shape. Church leaders recognized that the unusual elements of the ceremony, its extreme vows, symbolic gestures, and esoteric language, could be misinterpreted or distorted by outsiders. Historical letters and fragmented manuscripts suggest that clergy were explicitly instructed to never speak of the ritual outside the confines of the Vatican. Even among those permitted to witness or participate, oaths of silence were mandated, sometimes reinforced by severe spiritual penalties, such as excommunication or mandatory penance. These measures created a culture in which knowledge of the ritual was highly compartmentalized. Very few individuals could know the full details, and those who did were legally and spiritually bound to secrecy. The Vatican also engaged in proactive suppression through the manipulation and control of records. Many of the documents that described or referenced the ritual were either destroyed, heavily redacted, or hidden deep within the Vatican archives. The Church maintained that this was necessary to protect the sanctity of the ritual and prevent sacrilege, but historians note that the effect was also to suppress public awareness and scholarly inquiry. Certain manuscripts, when discovered centuries later, bore clear signs of deliberate erasure, passages scratched out, pages missing, and marginal notes indicating that portions were too sacred to be revealed. These deliberate acts of censorship ensured that even diligent researchers could only access fragments of the truth, perpetuating a veil of mystery. Eyewitness accounts, when they survived, were often downplayed or discredited by the Church. Letters, diaries, and travelogues from European nobles or clergy occasionally referenced the ritual, describing its unusual gestures, cryptic vows, and solemn atmosphere. However, the Church consistently challenged the authenticity of these accounts, dismissing them as exaggerations, misunderstandings, or trite fabrications. Scholars who attempted to reconstruct the ritual from these fragmented accounts were met with significant obstacles. Manuscripts were locked away, access was restricted, and inquiries could result in ecclesiastical censure. The combination of official denials and active obstruction created an environment where curiosity about the ritual became a dangerous pursuit, reserved only for those willing to risk reputation, favor, or spiritual standing. Even beyond the immediate religious authorities, the suppression extended to political realms. The ritual often involved prominent noble families or influential figures whose unions were politically sensitive. Knowledge of the ceremony falling into the wrong hands could potentially destabilize alliances, create scandal, or incite unrest. For example, letters from the Renaissance period suggest that royal emissaries who witnessed portions of the ritual were sworn to secrecy under threat of severe repercussions, including the withdrawal of papal favor or political retaliation. By controlling who could know and what could be shared, the Vatican ensured that the ritual remained shielded from public scrutiny, reinforcing the Church's authority over both spiritual and temporal affairs. Part of the suppression also involved the strategic promotion of alternative narratives. In instances where rumors of the ritual leaked beyond the Vatican walls, Church authorities sometimes countered with official explanations that frame the ceremony as entirely ordinary, mundane, or symbolic. By minimizing the ceremony in public discourse and emphasizing its alignment with conventional Catholic weddings, the Church effectively neutralized potential scandal while preserving the ritual's secrecy. This careful management of perception allowed the Vatican to maintain control over its image, presenting a facade of piety and propriety while keeping the more unusual elements concealed. The architecture and physical design of the Vatican itself played a role in suppression. Many of the locations where the ritual was performed were deliberately secluded. Hidden chapels, private chambers, and restricted corridors ensured that unauthorized individuals could not observe or document proceedings. The combination of restricted access and physical isolation made it extraordinarily difficult for outsiders to obtain first-hand accounts. Even visiting dignitaries were rarely permitted beyond certain ceremonial areas, and those who did enter were closely monitored by trusted clergy who could enforce silence and adherence to protocol. This physical control over the environment, combined with oaths of secrecy, created an almost impenetrable barrier between the ritual and the outside world. The ritual's suppression was not only practical but also psychological. By cultivating an aura of mystery and danger, the Church ensured that curiosity about the ritual was tempered by fear. Stories circulated of individuals who had glimpsed forbidden elements of the ceremony only to experience spiritual or social repercussions. Over time, these stories were embellished, creating legends of the Vatican's hidden rites and instilling a sense of reverence or dread among those outside the inner circle. The effect was to transform secrecy into a tool of control, making the ritual as much about obedience and submission as it was about marriage itself. Despite centuries of suppression, fragments of knowledge inevitably escaped. Scholars, inquisitive clerics, and even rebellious nobles pieced together aspects of the ritual through diaries, letters, and partial manuscripts. However, these reconstructions were always incomplete and often contradictory. The deliberate destruction, concealment, and distortion of records meant that the ritual's true form remained elusive. Even modern historians must rely on cross-referencing disparate sources, some of which were heavily redacted or cryptically written, making definitive conclusions difficult. This enduring uncertainty has only added to the ritual's aura of intrigue, positioning it as one of the Vatican's most enduring and unsettling mysteries. In conclusion, the Vatican's attempts to conceal and suppress knowledge of its secret wedding ritual were as elaborate and calculated as the ceremony itself. Through oaths of silence, selective access, destruction and redaction of records, and strategic narrative control, the Church ensured that only a select few could witness or participate, while the broader world remained largely ignorant. Political sensitivities, the potential for scandal, and the ritual's inherently unsettling nature all contributed to the intensity of these suppression efforts. Yet the very act of hiding it has paradoxically ensured that the ritual remains legendary, a haunting symbol of the Vatican's ability to wield secrecy, authority, and mystique in equal measure despite centuries of strict secrecy, suppression, and the Vatican's meticulous control over information. Fragments of knowledge about the secret wedding ritual have survived. These remnants often emerge through eyewitness accounts, leaked letters, diaries, and reports from outsiders who glimpsed the ceremony or heard second-hand descriptions. While sparse and fragmented, these accounts provide tantalizing insights into a ritual that was otherwise buried in silence and obscurity. They reveal both the extraordinary nature of the ceremony and the human fascination and fear that it inspired. Many of the earliest references come from visiting clerics or noble observers who were granted limited access to Vatican ceremonies. These individuals often describe an atmosphere unlike any traditional wedding, solemn, ritualized, and unnervingly intense. One such account, found in a partially redacted manuscript from the late 15th century, describes a bride and groom standing before an altar in near total silence, while clergy intoned prayers in archaic Latin that even the participan Tias appeared not to fully understand. According to the witness, the ritual combined elements of devotion, psychological pressure, and strict physical discipline. The couple's movements were tightly choreographed. Every gesture had symbolic meaning, and even minor deviations were met with stern correction by the officiants. What made the ritual especially shocking to observers were the symbolic acts that seemed, at least superficially, extreme or even unsettling. Some accounts detail the ceremonial use of consecrated implements, such as ornate staffs, ritual blades, or rings engraved with cryptic inscriptions. In one account, a visiting noble described seeing the couple kneel before an altar, while the officiating clergy placed their hands on specific parts of the participants' bodies, a gesture said to symbolize spiritual unity, obedience, and the transfer of sacred authority. While intended as symbolic acts of devotion, to outsiders the scene appeared almost coercive or ritualistically intense. Observers consistently emphasized the psychological weight of the ceremony. Participants were physically restrained, silent for extended periods, and subjected to a level of scrutiny and ritual discipline that was extraordinary by any standard. Leaked letters and diaries from 16th and 17th century European courts provide further glimpses into the ritual. Some of these records come from noble families who had arranged secret Vatican weddings to solidify political alliances. Their RS often describe the tension, anxiety, and awe experienced by both participants and witnesses. In one particularly vivid account, a courtier wrote of a bride so pale and silent, her eyes fixed upon a distant cross, as if pleading to heaven for guidance, while the groom stood rigid, reciting words he could scarcely comprehend, his hand trembling as it touched the sacred relic. These descriptions convey a mixture of reverence and unease, highlighting the extraordinary psychological impact of the ritual. Even more compelling are accounts that hint at elements of the ritual that the Vatican actively sought to suppress. For example, certain letters suggest the use of private, concealed chambers in which the most secret parts of the ceremony were conducted. Observers describe entering rooms dimly lit by candles, where the air was thick with incense and the low chanting of priests created a hypnotic, almost oppressive atmosphere. In some cases, couples were said to perform acts of symbolic penance or submission, though the precise details were never recorded in official documents. Witnesses often note that the most mysterious gestures were deliberately veiled from their view, creating an eerie sense that they were observing only fragments of a far more complex and incomprehensible ceremony. One particularly intriguing set of records comes from the diaries of a Venetian diplomat in the early 1600s. He claimed to have attended a Vatican wedding for a prominent noble family and meticulously documented every detail he could observe, all while carefully avoiding direct involvement. His descriptions include unusual sequences of prayers, the precise placement of sacred objects, and cryptic oaths whispered to the couple. Notably, he recorded that the couple's physical gestures were so rigidly controlled that they appeared to move under the will of another as if guided by invisible hands. While the diplomat acknowledged the symbolic intentions behind the ritual, he also expressed profound discomfort at its intensity, noting that the ceremony is not merely a union of souls, but a demonstration of obedience to powers beyond mortal understanding. Leaked Vatican documents also corroborate some of these eyewitness accounts. Partial archival records reveal instructions to officiants on how to conduct the ceremony, emphasizing secrecy, ritual precision, and the careful management of observers. Certain notes indicate that even minor mistakes during the ritual could require repetition or penance, further emphasizing the psychological rigor imposed upon participants. Scholars interpret these instructions as evidence that the Vatican considered the ceremony not merely a private religious event, but a test of obedience, endurance, and spiritual discipline, a combination that modern observers understandably find disturbing. Eyewitness accounts also shed light on the measures taken to prevent information from leaking. Witnesses frequently describe strict surveillance by clergy, guards stationed outside ceremonial chambers, and the use of oaths that carried spiritual and legal weight. In some cases, observers were forbidden from taking notes or leaving any tangible evidence of the ritual, and letters recounting details were often encoded or veiled in metaphorical language to avoid ecclesiastical repercussions. The lengths to which the Vatican went to protect the secrecy of the ritual only reinforced its aura of mystique, transforming the ceremony from a mere wedding into a legendary, almost mythic event. Perhaps most striking is the consistency among these fragmented accounts, despite the centuries and locations they cover. Whether Venetian diplomats, French noblemen, or anonymous clerics, witnesses describe the same combination of symbolic acts, intense psychological pressure, and strict secrecy. Even when the specifics differ, the overall impression is of a ceremony deliberately designed to impress, intimidate, and elevate participants while maintaining the Church's absolute control. This consistency lends credibility to the idea that the ritual was both highly standardized and deeply enigmatic, a hidden world within the Vatican that few were permitted to enter. The surviving eyewitness records, combined with leaked manuscripts, also highlight the ritual's enduring influence on European culture. Writers, artists, and historians who encountered fragments of these accounts often reimagined them, blending fact with legend. Tales of the Vatican's secret weddings circulated in whispered anecdotes, inspiring both fascination and fear. The dramatic, almost theatrical nature of the ceremony, coupled with the Church's efforts to suppress knowledge of it, created a feedback loop. Secrecy enhanced mystique, mystique fueled curiosity, and curiosity amplified the ritual's legendary reputation. In conclusion, the eyewitness accounts and leaked records that survive paint a vivid picture of a ritual both extraordinary and unsettling. They reveal a ceremony in which symbolism, obedience, psychological rigor, and secrecy intertwined, creating an experience unlike any ordinary wedding. While many details remain obscured, the fragments that remain provide compelling evidence of the ritual's intensity and the Vatican's extraordinary measures to protect its sanctity. These accounts ensure that, despite centuries of suppression, the ritual continues to capture the imagination, standing as a testament to the Church's ability to wield secrecy and power in equal measure centuries after its inception. The Vatican's secret wedding ritual remains shrouded in mystery, its precise details obscured by deliberate suppression and the passage of time. Yet the ritual continues to captivate historians, theologians, and enthusiasts of religious intrigue. Modern interpretations attempt to reconcile the ceremony's shocking historical accounts with the Church's broader spiritual mission, while also exploring the cultural and psychological implications of such a secretive practice. The legacy of the ritual is thus multifaceted, part historical curiosity, part cautionary tale, and part enduring myth that underscores the Vatican's unique ability to combine authority, secrecy, and spectacle. One primary focus of modern scholarship is the ritual's symbolic significance. Historians argue that the ceremony was not intended to shock or harm, but rather to enforce the sacredness of marriage within the highest echelons of Church and European society. By subjecting participants to a highly ritualized and psychologically intense experience, the Church emphasized that marriage, especially among nobility or clergy-connected families, was more than a social contract. It was a spiritual covenant with cosmic ramifications. The elaborate vows, symbolic gestures, and ritualized actions were intended to instill a profound sense of responsibility and spiritual awareness, creating an environment in which the couple's personal desires were secondary to divine and institutional obligations. The psychological intensity of the ritual, often described as disturbing in historical accounts, has been interpreted by modern scholars as a deliberate method of inculcating obedience and reverence. Contemporary psychologists and anthropologists studying ritual behavior point out that many religious ceremonies employ extreme symbolism, physical endurance, or repetition to reinforce spiritual and social hierarchies. In this context, the Vatican wedding ritual can be seen as an extension of broader ritual traditions, using controlled stress, symbolic acts, and esoteric language to elevate participants' perception of sacred authority. While historical observers may have found these practices frightening or coercive, modern interpretations often frame them as sophisticated exercises in religious pedagogy rather than malevolence. At the same time, the ritual's clandestine nature has fueled ongoing fascination and speculation. Popular culture, conspiracy theories, and esoteric studies frequently highlight the ritual as evidence of the Vatican's hidden power and secret knowledge. Books, documentaries, and online discussions often portray the ceremony as both mystical and morally ambiguous, emphasizing its supposed disturbing aspects while ignoring more mundane explanations. These interpretations are part of the ritual's legacy. The secrecy that once protected the Church's authority now drives curiosity, blending historical fact with imagination. In many ways, the ritual has become a symbol of the unknown and unknowable facets of one of the world's most influential institutions. The leaked manuscripts, eyewitness accounts, and fragmentary records that survived centuries of suppression have also informed modern historical analysis. Researchers carefully reconstruct the ritual using cross-references between documents, linguistic analysis of Latin prayers, and comparisons with other contemporary ceremonies. These studies suggest that while the ritual's intensity was remarkable, many of its more sensational aspects, such as extreme physical hardship or secretive acts of penance, may have been exaggerated over time. Modern historians emphasize the need to distinguish between mythologized accounts and plausible historical practice, yet they acknowledge that even if some details were embellished, the ritual's combination of secrecy, symbolism, and psychological rigor remains extraordinary by any standard. Religious scholars, too, have grappled with the ethical and spiritual implications of the ritual. Some argue that it reflects the Church's historical tension between public piety and private control, a ceremony meant to sanctify marriage for the elite, but conducted in ways that reinforced hierarchy, obedience, and institutional authority. Others suggest that the ritual's extreme secrecy and symbolic intensity reflect an earnest attempt to maintain the sacred nature of marriage, preventing it from being trivialized by worldly concerns. In either interpretation, the ritual serves as a window into the mindset of a church seeking to balance spiritual ideals with social and political realities, a balance that continues to shape Catholic practice today. The cultural legacy of the ritual extends beyond academia. Writers, artists, and filmmakers have drawn inspiration from the ceremony's secrecy and psychological intensity. Novels exploring Vatican intrigue, films dramatizing historical conspiracies, and even video games depicting secret religious orders often reference rituals reminiscent of the secret Vatican wedding. This enduring fascination underscores a broader human interest in hidden knowledge and forbidden practices. The ritual's combination of mystery, solemnity, and perceived transgression makes it a compelling narrative device, allowing contemporary audiences to explore themes of power, faith, and obedience through a historical lens. Interestingly, the ritual's legacy also sparks reflection on secrecy and authority in modern institutions. The Vatican wedding ritual serves as a case study in how organizations maintain control over information, manage perception, and cultivate mystique to reinforce influence. Modern scholars of sociology, organizational behavior, and religious studies often cite the ritual when examining the interplay between secrecy, authority, and cultural memory. The Church's centuries-long efforts to suppress knowledge of the ceremony demonstrate how secrecy can shape both historical understanding and contemporary imagination, leaving an indelible imprint on culture even when the original practice has ceased. Finally, the ritual's enduring mystique is reinforced by the very lack of definitive knowledge. Unlike many historical ceremonies that are documented in exhaustive detail, the Vatican wedding ritual survives only through fragments, second-hand accounts, and heavily redacted manuscripts. This scarcity of information allows modern observers to project interpretations, theories, and moral judgments onto the ritual. Its ambiguity ensures that it remains a fertile ground for storytelling, scholarly debate, and speculation. A ritual that is simultaneously historical fact, legendary tale, and symbol of institutional secrecy. In conclusion, the secret Vatican wedding ritual occupies a unique space in both historical scholarship and popular imagination. Modern interpretations reveal a ceremony designed to sanctify marriage, reinforce spiritual authority, and instill reverence and obedience through highly symbolic and psychologically intense practices. At the same time, the ritual's secrecy, suppression, and fragmentary documentation have created an aura of mystery that continues to captivate audiences, inspire artistic representations, and fuel speculation. Its legacy demonstrates the enduring power of secrecy, ritual, and symbolism, reminding us that the most compelling stories are often those that lie just beyond the reach of full understanding. Even centuries later, the ritual remains a testament to the Vatican's ability to intertwine devotion, authority, and mystique, leaving a historical imprint that continues to intrigue, disturb, and fascinate.